What's up and welcome to the Level Health Podcast. Today, Josh is interviewing Kate Wall. Kate became a nutritionist after being a nurse for 13 years. She's also been working with Dr. Gabrielle Fundaro and Shannon over at Comprehensive Coaching. In this episode, we discuss the differences between dietitians and nutritionists in the US and the UK, the approach to weight management in the UK, weight stigma, and some common obstacles she sees her clients encounter. She clearly is a coach that really cares about her clients and their overall well-being, and I think the information she gives in this episode has the potential to help a lot of people. Big thanks to Kate for coming on the show. You can follow her on Instagram at Kate Wall Nutrition. You can also visit her website, katewallnutrition.co.uk. We'll have those linked in the description below. For those of you that don't already know, our website, Level Health, is a directory, community, and network of qualified personal trainers. We want to help create a space where clients are able to find the right trainer for them. We have accounts for both clients and fitness professionals. Client accounts are always free, where you'll get access to our trainer directory and other resources. Our basic pro option is now available for trainers, and our verified pro membership will be available early next year. If you haven't signed up already, head over to levelhealth.net and set up your membership. Thanks for listening, and if you have a second, we would love it if you gave us a rating and review so that our podcast and the professionals we interview can get more exposure. You can also subscribe so you don't miss any of our new content. Thanks, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
Kate, can you just give us a little background on who you are and why you do what you do?
And thanks so much for inviting me on, because this is my first podcast experience, so a really good thing for me to do. So
we're glad to have you.
I'm Kate, and I'm a registered nutritionist over in the UK. And previously I was a nurse and did that for about 13 years, working in paediatric critical care. And then about 5 years ago, I left nursing, actually due to ill health. I had to leave. I suffered PTSD following my son being unwell on my intensive care unit. So that then led me to leave nursing and really left me in a funny place. I felt like I'd left something where I'd lost my identity, how I defined myself really as a person. Part of that was being a nurse. I'd worked my way up to being a sister, and then suddenly all of that progression and achievement was gone. And I sort of felt, well, I've got no career anymore. So it was quite a confusing and scary place to be. And so obviously I had to think of a way to move forward once my health was in a better place. And when I thought about what made me a nurse and what skills I used to be a good nurse, I realised that there was a lot of transferable skills that I could use, and that this would mean I hadn't actually lost the career in its entirety. And I didn't need to waste that time and experience. I could just utilise it in another way. So I've always been a massive foodie. I love cooking. We talk about cooking, we read about cooking, we watch food on the TV. Our lives revolve around our love of food. And this is something I grew up with as well. So I've always known how food is so much more than just physical hunger, the joy it gives, the pleasure, how you can show love, make memories and all of that. And then my interest in healthy eating sort of grew as I got a bit older. Wanted to lose a bit of weight myself, had children, wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing by them. And so it all just seemed a good place to focus my energy on, because I was really passionate about the topic, and I could link that healthcare experience in through becoming a nutritionist. So I went on to complete my master's in nutrition and public health management, and that qualified me as an associate nutritionist. So that meant I was qualified, but I needed to build experience to become fully registered. And I've done a few roles since then. I've worked in schools, teaching children about healthy eating and well-being, and helping them to understand how nutrition, physical activity, sleep, mental health, how these things all link together and impact on each other. And that then led me to be a nutrition consultant for that company, sort of developing the program, making sure that it was up to date and that it wasn't causing harm in this sort of vulnerable group of children. There was, not make sure there was no emphasis on things like good and bad foods, and making sure they knew about nutrition in a wider sense. So that was really good. But I did miss that kind of one-to-one work and working with people on a bit of a deeper level. And that's how I then moved into weight management in the NHS, which is our National Health Service in the UK. And I really enjoy this work. And I work with people on a one-to-one basis as an assistant. And so I support people in between those dietitian appointments. And that's something where I've learned a lot from. The other thing I do is I'm also an intern at the comprehensive coaching team, which is how we kind of got linked together. And that's another thing that I really enjoy doing, because, you know, I completed their webinar series, and then I just really wanted to learn more about it and how you can be a coach and not choose a camp. How you can do the best for your client and be both weight focused or weight neutral, depending on what's right for them. And that has helped me to feel more confident in my own thoughts and beliefs on this topic, working in that team. So I've learned a lot. I've got linked up with more like-minded people. And so I'm really grateful for that opportunity as well. So it's kind of been a busy few years, lots of change, and I'm still really busy now. I am in the process of starting my own business as well, which hopefully will be coming in the next few months. So I'm sort of juggling lots of balls, but really enjoying just learning, and really glad that I came into nutrition as a career.
Yeah, I think at some point you get really good at juggling things. And I think a big part of becoming an adult is figuring out how much you can juggle and without dropping too many. You kind of had a similar transition, though less, I would say, comprehensive, for the sake of lack of a better word right now, that I did. So I was a personal trainer after I got out of the military. It was like you is how I helped people. I mean, it's a little bit different than a nurse. I think that's a little bit more serious. But on that same note, I went through that transitionary period where like that was my identity, and I didn't realize that as I was getting more into the business side of things, how was I going to continue to help people? And this is kind of the latest manifestation of that. But I want to ask you a little bit of a non-serious question. What is your favorite food? Favorite kind of food, rather?
I'd have to go probably Asian, I think. I'm glad I don't have to define down to an exact food, because there is so many foods I love. But I definitely like anything with a bit of spice, those Southeastern Asian flavors that, you know, probably have something around that at least once a week in this house. And my kids are starting to love those flavors as well. So that's really nice.
They do such a good job of hiding those spices. So I mean, my girlfriend and I have talked about this a bunch. Like, the American food is just not as good as, I mean, we go to a place that's South Indian, and it's masala, and it's one of my favorite restaurants I've ever been to. It's phenomenal. But that's Indian food, and really anything other than Chinese food is a recent discovery to me. That was all we really were exposed to growing up. So I wanted to touch on something before I moved, a few things actually. So you mentioned coming into the school and making sure that the education program that they were exposing the kids to was really up to speed. Was any of the information they had already, was it causing harm? Was it just not up to date? What was the state of it when you came into it?
I wouldn't, I don't think you could say it was causing harm. I think I just looked at it from a slightly different angle to whoever had developed it in the first place. And just wanted to make sure that the language that we were using wasn't anything that could potentially cause harm, and making sure we were just being quite, non-judgmental in the way we were presenting this information, because you've also got to understand that a lot of these children come from backgrounds where they might not be able to make choices. You may be telling them something in school, but when they go home, have they got the ability to put that into practice? So you've got to be able to provide information that's helpful, but also doesn't make them feel worried if they can't go home and do that, if they haven't got a table to sit around and have family meals, or they haven't got the money or the access to certain foods, or it's just not part of their culture. There could be lots of elements. So it's difficult to create a program like that that's going to go across a national basis without, you may always not quite include everyone in every way, but just trying to make it as good as you can and reduce the potential risk as much as possible, I think was the aim.
Yeah, I mean, that's all you can really do working with clients in general, but I can imagine having such a diverse pool that you're going to be exposing these kids to these ideas and practices. Like, you have to be real careful, because a lot of these best practices really are best practices for people that are not disadvantaged socioeconomically. So that I'd be I'm sure it'd be an interesting path to walk there. So I wanted to really cover here the differences between dietitians and nutritionists in the US versus the UK. I think a lot of people know, more people are learning about the differences between dietitians and nutritionists in the United States. And what it's kind of coming to seem like is dietitians are the more qualified here, and then nutritionists kind of get relegated below that. And I feel like that's definitely unfair for a lot of nutritionists in the United States, 100%. However, because it's not a protected term here, a lot of people can kind of steal that and say, oh, I'm a nutritionist. But as far as I'm aware, in the UK, there's a much more rigorous standard to be called a nutritionist. Can you explain that difference a little bit?
Yeah, I can. And the answer kind of is yes and no in terms of it being more rigorous. And I'm not that familiar with the US system, and just explained it a bit there. But if I do explain the UK system, then you can make the comparison.
Yeah, thank you.
But yeah, basically a registered nutritionist in the UK means that you're registered with the Association for Nutrition, and they are the people who regulate nutritionists, and therefore as a registered nutritionist you would have to adhere to their code of ethics, maintain a portfolio of specific competencies, regular CPD, etc., all the things you would expect from a regulated profession. So that's nutritionists. And then dietitians are the only qualified healthcare professionals in the UK that would assess, diagnose and treat dietary and nutritional problems. So they may work with healthy and ill people. Dietitians are the only nutritional professionals in our country that are regulated by law with protected title status. So as a registered nutritionist, that title isn't protected by law still. But that is something that we are working, or the association is working to change. So hopefully in the coming years, we will have that protected title status, and that'll be really important to help be able to define us against those that are less qualified. Because it is true the same that someone could call themselves a nutritionist in the UK who hasn't done very much, if any, training. So it could be like, your typical quick online course and then you're a nutritionist. So that unfortunately can lead to certain people giving out incorrect, inaccurate, outdated information. It might be well-intentioned people, or it might be people who are quacks, so to speak. But either way, it does taint our reputation. And there is still a bit of snobbery, I suppose, that, yeah, a dietitian is the higher status versus the nutritionist, rather than us being just different, with different roles. And some of what we do will cross over and some of it will not. And there is, certainly important as a nutritionist to know your scope of practice. You shouldn't be diagnosing people with nutritional disorders. You shouldn't be giving out treatments. And if a nutritionist is doing that, then that would be a red flag that they're probably not someone, you might want to get a second opinion on that, or maybe speak to a dietitian. But I think in the UK, this is massively changing, and there is still work to be done to help people understand what a registered nutritionist can do and what we're there for. But there is a lot of examples of dietitians and nutritionists working together now, supporting each other. You see that on social media quite a lot. It's starting to happen within the NHS. Things are moving forward, and actually, we're learning how we can complement each other. and learn from each other. And I certainly want to learn from them. There's lots to learn. So, you know, it's helping us to have those different perspectives, different conversations, and a more collaborative approach. So it is starting to move away from them and us. I think that's obviously definitely a good thing in my book. So yeah, I think things are getting better, but it's still a work in progress, I would say.
No, that's good to hear. And actually, I had just written down a more collaborative approach. I wanted to talk about that just for a second, because it is very adversarial, especially here, because there is that difference between dietitians and nutritionists, and it's almost like this us or them kind of thing. And I'm not sure what's going to change that. Perhaps just time. Perhaps other countries like the UK or England putting into practice policies that kind of make that a little bit more clear. Because I mean, it's no secret that we have nutrition related issues across the globe, whether it's just not getting enough of certain foods, getting too much of certain foods, getting too much food overall, the complex psychological factors that go into it. There's so much that goes into it. So I feel like we need as many qualified nutrition professionals as possible across the span. You mentioned the NHS. I wanted to also talk about that, because that's something else that's different between the United States and over there. Can you just describe the weight management approach within the NHS, the healthcare system over there?
Yeah, so there is a 4-tiered system, and tier 1 is kind of primary care with community advice. So it could be GP, health visitor, leisure services, that kind of thing. Tier 2 would be primary care with community intervention. So that might be some sort of community weight management service, maybe similar to the Weight Watchers type group. Then there's tier 3, which is what I work in, and that's a specialist multidisciplinary team. And in that will be dietitians, with a psychotherapist. There may or may not be a consultant. We don't have a doctor linked to our service, but I think some do. And we work with people on over a 12-month period, supporting them to make nutrition and lifestyle changes, but then also with that psychotherapy CBT side to things for those that require that as well. And then there's tier 4, and that's bariatric surgery. So that's for those that want to go forward, and they have to go through the tier 3 first, work your way through the system. But for those that then want to move forward to surgery, then that would be tier 4.
That's interesting. Because obviously everything is privatized here, so you could just go directly to where you want. I mean, there are, for that extreme, the bariatric surgery, there's certainly kind of robots put in place for you from the actual practitioners. But it's interesting that there's this actual stepwise program that you have in place over there. You said tier 3 had psychotherapy and kind of cognitive behavioral therapy. Is that typically pretty effective? Or is it a pretty effective component of the overall model, I should say?
I think it's an essential part of the model. It will be more or less effective for different people. I mean, it depends if that person is in the right place at the right time. Sometimes they've got other things going on. It's not the right time for them, or maybe they've got other mental health work to do before they can move on to this work. So there could be reasons why it's not effective for some, but for those where you do get them at the right point in time, they do generally report it to be extremely helpful, because it can sometimes be that missing link that they've been looking for. And I think, a lot of them do find benefit from it towards, not only their eating behaviors, but also just the way they are thinking and their, those internal beliefs they have about themselves, and they can apply that to their wider lives as well. So yeah, I think it's a really important part of the service.
I mean, in the United States, I'm sure you're seeing what's happening with the comprehensive coaching group as much as I am. Like, it's almost like the health and fitness professionals across the board. I have a background in personal training, dietitians. There's all these, I'm seeing these in these groups, and It's almost like we're trying to pick up the slack and learn some of these things, these cognitive behavioral coaching, these, acceptance commitment therapy, just basic ways to communicate with the people that we're working with to try to fill that gap. So it was interesting to hear that was kind of baked into the program over there. And while we're on the behavioral side of things, because I don't think that this question is going to be much focused outside of behavior, what are some major obstacles that you see people you work with encounter?
Well, I mean, there can be a lot of different factors that affect people that come into the service. I mean, there's obviously the biological factors, so it could be genetics, age, gender, that kind of thing, but they're out of people's control. So obviously better to focus on the areas that they might be able to control or improve. So, we do know that obesity can be quite strongly linked with inequality. So that often those living with obesity, and lots of the people that I work with, may have several other challenges they're facing, which can make the goal of reducing their weight more difficult. And these could be individual lifestyle factors, social or community factors, or maybe wider general socioeconomic, cultural or environmental issues. Honestly, it's probably a mix of all of these. And when you start to consider these factors in more depth, it does help to explain why we need to reduce that individual responsory rhetoric when it comes to health, because it isn't really helping anyone move forward. It increases shame and it doesn't address the root causes of the problem. So it doesn't mean that people can't and shouldn't take responsibility for themselves and be proactive in looking after themselves and wanting to improve or move towards their potential. It just means we have to be understanding that this will be harder for some than others. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach that will work for everyone, because we all have our own barriers and challenges to face. So rather than blaming individuals for failing as coaches and healthcare professionals, we want to look at how can we enable them to move forward. So thinking of those social determinants of health, for example, it's used to, I think it's useful to consider the obstacles that people encounter. Examples being things like lack of education. So can somebody actually read? Sometimes people be given an information leaflet, go away, why have they not acted on it? In fact, they couldn't even read it, but you didn't ask the question. Have they been taught to cook? Do they know how to improve their diet? What's healthy, what's not? So there could be lots of issues around education. It could be housing issues. Have they got adequate housing, ample cooking facilities, storage facilities, those kind of things? What financial stresses do they have? Can they afford the food they're being advised to eat? I know some people have said that they get food from a food bank and then they don't get the choice of that food, and it's not always the most healthy options. So that reduces their ability to be autonomous in their decisions. What's the food environment that they live near to like? How many takeaways are there in that local area? Can they get fruit and veg at the local shop? Do they have transport or money to get to a shop further afield? If not, what's their working environment? People have antisocial hours. They could work nights, truckers. How do they have regular healthy meals and still get the sleep that they need, for example? Are they unemployed? Sometimes people are. Why? Is it because of poor health? What disabilities do they have? Can they stand and prepare food? Are they in constant pain? How does that affect their stress levels, their ability to sleep? What impact does that have on the choices that they're making? Often people in our service, there's a reasonable amount of people who may have had a history of trauma. Has that been treated effectively? Are the local mental health services overloaded? How long do they have to wait to see a specialist? These are all questions to ask. And, it may be social support that's an issue. Who they live with, are they supporting them or sabotaging their wanting to change? Maybe they have to prioritize others over themselves. It could be children, it could be an elderly relative. But they're back at the queue when it comes to prioritizing. And then finally, this isn't an exhaustive list, but say there will be more. But it could be also psychological barriers. So beliefs that they've got, or self-sabotaging thoughts, people seeing themselves as not worth it. They may have faced weight stigma, blame, shame, establish these beliefs that they won't be able to do this, they're not good enough, they don't deserve better than this. And they're deep-seated beliefs. They may even have stemmed from childhood. And so these are, again, issues that need to be thought about. So if any of those things, or it could be several of those things, are relevant to your client, then it could be impossible for them to achieve a specific goal unless those obstacles are addressed. So it's just about not making assumptions, asking questions, getting to know that person, and developing a trust so that they feel that they can actually talk to you about these often very personal issues.
Okay. It was obvious that this is something that you think about quite a bit and that you're immersed in quite a lot, because you did an excellent job of explaining really what I will very crudely summarize as, it's not about a macro split. It's not about some eat X amount of food at this time and there you go, now your goals have achieved. In fact, you didn't really even mention one thing that like you said was within the control of the person, because oftentimes it's not. It's stuff that's outside of control of the people. And again, I wanted to point out one other thing. You mentioned this right at the beginning of that I don't want to say rant, but it wasn't a rant because that was all incredibly valuable. And that is that it will be harder for some people than others. I think if you're not starting from that understanding, then you're kind of not even beginning in the right place with people. If you think that it's just, I'm telling the person what to do, whether you're a personal trainer, whether you're a dietitian, a registered nutritionist, whatever it is, anything that you're working with people, if you just right out the bat expect them to just follow whatever you say blindly, it's not even, you're not even in a good place to start in the beginning. I wanted to talk about weight stigma just real quick. Can you explain what weight stigma is and how it manifests in people?
Yeah, so weight stigma refers to discriminatory acts and ideologies that are targeted towards individuals because of their weight or size. So weight stigma is a result of weight bias, and weight bias refers to negative ideologies associated with obesity, for example. So we might have certain social constructs that we have, and that depending on culture. So, I mean, some cultures, higher weight symbolizes health, strength, fertility, in say some African cultures, whereas in Western cultures it's often the opposite, and we place a value on a smaller body size and link that to success, health and self-control, for example. But weight bias definitely persists in healthcare settings. So physicians, nutritionists, dietitians, fitness professionals, they've all been shown in different ways to have a proneness to assign stereotypical characteristics such as lazy, weak-willed, non-compliant to people in bigger bodies. So there has been evidence that physicians may show lower levels of respect to patients with higher BMIs. They may spend less time providing consultations with them, and they may even make stigmatizing comments. So, you know, there has been studies that have shown up to 53% of people with overweight and obesity reported to have received inappropriate comments from their doctor about their weight. So, you know, also even the environment, you know, it may be that you know, they just don't have big enough gowns or chairs, examination tables. These are things that could lead to someone feeling stigmatized. So having these preconceived ideas about a person based on their size is obviously problematic, because anyone that can't or chooses not to subscribe to that preconceived acceptable social norm is made to feel that they're not normal, or they're not as good as the person who is in that sort of body type that we've put value on. And so when someone's continually told everything is just because you were overweight, and if you just lose the weight, this is going to solve all your problems, it does become this vicious cycle. So not only is it acceptable to talk to someone in this way, or to judge someone like that, it does reinforce those thoughts and feelings and beliefs that that person may have around themselves, that they're not good enough. And that just is going to make them feel less empowered to make the change. They may not even access healthcare if they've experienced this weight stigma. They don't want to feel that again. It's a horrible feeling. And so health related issues can be put on the back burner rather than getting the treatment that they need. And I've certainly heard quite a few examples where people have said to me, I've been complaining to my doctor about X, Y, and Z, and they've just told me it's because I'm fat. So they're not getting the same investigations or potential treatment, and things can get missed because they've put it all down to these preconceived ideas. So that again, I mean, it's going to be a problem on an individual level, but also on a public health level. You know, this is only going to drive further issues with people getting further into these vicious cycles. And as that happens more and more, then, you know, you end up with actually a problem at a public health level. So yeah, I think it's problematic on many levels. We are starting to see change with it. I know there is some training and things that are starting to be introduced, but again, it's still something where there's quite a big issue and probably needs talking about a bit more to move this issue forward properly.
Yes, I think anything that's rooted in our culture, it takes a very long time to change. And I mean, I too have heard the nightmares, you've probably heard more than I have, with people going to the doctor for a back issue or something like that. And the only thing that they are told is to lose weight. And at the end of the day, no matter where you are in the healthcare system, I think you have to ask yourself, look in the mirror, whatever you have to do, look in the mirror and ask yourself, is the approach that I'm using going to possibly even achieve the result that I'm looking for? If you're a doctor and you're there to help people, you should be asking yourself, is what I'm doing going to achieve that end goal? Is the person that, you know, as a coach, is my approach to coaching with this person going to hopefully net and result in the benefits that I'm looking for them? And I don't think that that's a question that a lot of people ask themselves, because like, if you said, like, if they're not even getting addressed, if their problems aren't even getting investigated, then like, what is the point of them even coming? And then they probably ask themselves that, and then they don't end up coming, like you said. So it's a interesting problem that I think has I don't know if it's either a clear solution or a not very clear solution. I think that people need to really ask themselves those questions and see if there's something that we can do on an individual level, which there probably is. And I think that's how these shifts have to occur, at the individual level first.
Yeah, and I mean, in the end, education on both sides, you know, if you don't understand these issues fully, like all those obstacles I've just been through, for example, or you don't understand weight stigma as a concept, you wouldn't realize that you need to question yourself and the harm that you might be making. If you don't realize that you can actually, you know, it's been shown you can cause physical health problems through weight stigma. So you're actually potentially worsening somebody's metabolic health, their eating behaviors, their self-regulation, these sorts of things, then actually don't realize you're contributing to the problem. So I think it's education and making sure those conversations are happening where the people that need to know about it are going to hear it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the more people like yourself that are getting the word out there, there's definitely people voicing the importance of this shift. And on the note of shift, because you've talked about how deeply these problems are, and I definitely look back at, I mean, for instance, you said personal trainers, they're taught that there's this right body and healthy body, and the one that you need to aspire to, and then there's the one that the people that you're going to work with, and you're trying to take them from here to there. And it's never a question of whether or not they even want or need to go there. It's just a matter of we're taking you there whether you want to or not, or I'm not a good personal trainer. So that really got me thinking quite a bit about my past as a trainer. And I wanted to hear, how is your personal approach to working with clients, the people that you coach, changed over time?
Gosh, I've learned so much since training in nutrition. I've never been a massively judgy person. I don't think, but when you look back, you realize that you probably were judging where you didn't realize, and that you did have some beliefs around weight and diet in terms of kind of that more simplistic, well, why don't people just eat less and move more, and that would solve the problem. And it does make me cringe to actually say that out loud, but, you know, to be able to admit those mistakes and show how you've grown and what you've learned, I hope would, you know, that's what gives professionals integrity, because that honesty shows hopefully I can be trusted and that I am willing to listen, and I will change my view if I'm convinced otherwise. And I certainly have been about that. And, you know, I just had a certain level of ignorance. I didn't understand it fully, and now I do. I've changed my view. I definitely, when I first started, you know, I was very much offering solutions to people. So in my enthusiasm to use all of my ideas and my knowledge and my experience, always good intentioned. I've always only ever wanted to help people, but perhaps now looking back a little bit misguided and over enthusiastic at sort of not considering that bigger picture that we've detailed today. So I do now take more time to listen, to empower others to make change for themselves, to find the answers for themselves, you know, learning that asking permission to provide advice, and then checking in what they think of that advice. Is it relevant to them? Is it something they want to include in their life? And it's something that I'm still practicing all the time. I definitely still have that as an ongoing thing, but I'm just so aware of it now that, you know, even if I slip up, I can notice that and I can think about how to improve that next time. And probably the other thing that I've changed is I used to focus a lot on what people were eating, and I've since realized that so often the why of the eating is potentially more important, and helping to give them tools to help them get back in touch their interoceptive signals, or understanding triggers, understanding how they can realize how to meet their needs in the moment, that kind of thing, I think is really important. And again, helping to people to understand that missing piece of the puzzle. And, you know, you hear it all the time. I do know what I should eat, but why can't I? And it's looking at the bit behind the scenes, so to speak. So I think they're probably the main things that I've changed, and I'm still, you know, relatively new as a nutritional professional. So I've still got a lot to learn, and I'm sure I'll change more and more as time goes on. But yeah, I think they're probably the things that come to mind.
I had a few questions on that, but first I wanted to ask, how do you think that your background in nursing has influenced your ability? Because you weren't coming into being a registered nutritionist from never having worked with people. So I think that you had quite a bit of useful background before you even got into it.
I think it was useful because I was used to talking to people, listening to people, caring for people. I was very used to dealing with extremely difficult situations. You know, working in intensive care, I worked with children and families who were in really, really awful situations at times. So I wasn't scared of kind of talking to people at a deeper level. And you know, I've learned skills around that. The bit about kind of wanting to offer solutions and fix people, that's probably something I've had to really work on potentially because I was a nurse. As a nurse, you are the expert and you are there to kind of fix people, especially in intensive care. People sort of sit back and let you do what needs to be done. And I was used to kind of having that role. And moving into nutrition, I've had to really change and think about the fact that I'm not the expert anymore. They're the expert on themselves and I'm the guide. And that has been something that's taken some time to get used to. So I think there's sort of, you know, obviously understanding human physiology, and talking to people in difficult situations, and you know, people having emotions and not shying away from that. That was all helpful. And then other bits made it slightly more challenging and just really needed me to shift the way I approach my practice.
I'm glad that you brought that up again, because I wanted to talk about it. The providing solutions for people. You are not alone in this tendency whatsoever. I think that you're probably aware of that, but I continue to be surprised hearing that answer from people really consistently. In fact, just the last podcast I did, that was brought up, because we feel like we're doing them a service if we tell them what to do. But again, at the end, we have to look at what is the result, and if it does that result match what we're trying to achieve for this person, because giving them a solution may fix the problem temporarily, hopefully, if they follow through, but as we know, that's not necessarily the case. And we also then have to look long term. Are they learning behaviors and practices that are going to continue to carry them when they're done working with you? Because at the end of the day, they're not going to be seeing you for the rest of their life, hopefully. So you have to kind of consider longer term. I've always thought, if I'm training somebody for even just a few weeks, like, they better be pretty dang set to make some progress on their own at the, once they've separated from me. And I think that the same thing probably goes even more so for people in your position, because although I believe you are, as you said before, a little bit limited on time with people, I think you still want to make a lasting impression. And I don't believe that you are not making a lasting impression on people the way that you speak and the way that you care about people.
I hope so. Yeah. And it's making sure you aren't just trying to justify your existence. You sometimes feel like you've done more if you've given lots of suggestions, but actually stepping back and letting them work it through themselves can be a lot more helpful, like you say, in that longer term, once you're not there anymore. So yeah, I would agree with that. Justifying
your existence. That's one of the biggest problems with personal trainers, because it's a well-known problem that the first time somebody comes to you, you're going to put them through this crazy hard workout. They're going to be so sore. They're going to not be able to walk. They're going to be, absolutely just dead. And then you've justified your existence as a personal trainer because you've exposed them to, and then the problem then becomes somebody doing that every time, because a lot of times that's what happens with personal trainers. They just smoke their client. They just put them through the absolute ringer, because then they think that they've done something. But we have to look at a little bit longer term here. We have to think about what is the next step for them, not just I did my 60 minutes or whatever, when they came to see you, and then they're done. I wanted to ask you, what are a few practical and just basic tips that you would give to somebody that's really trying to make some changes in terms of their approach to their mindset around eating, their nutritional practices in general, but they aren't able to work with someone like yourself? What are some basic tips that they can follow?
It's really hard to answer that, because like we've just said, it's so individual, and anything I say could not be right for, one person, but right for another.
Yeah.
I guess, I would say that focusing on nutrition alone is probably never a good idea. Even as a nutritionist, I would always say that actually you're probably not going to fully meet your goals just by focusing on nutrition. So look wider. Remember that you're quite a complex being, and that everyone's interconnected, and start with what's most important to you or affecting you most, and then move out from there. So it might be that nutrition isn't the best starting point, and that focusing on sleep or stress management or social connectedness, other things might be important to look at first, and that might then allow you to feel able to make the nutritional changes that you're wanting to make. So kind of have a wider view on it, rather than just focusing in on particular nutritional changes. Don't try and change everything at once, I would say. So just small actionable changes. Once you're comfortable with that change, then you can add in some more, but don't try and make grand, bold statements and do too much too soon or too much at once. Trying to reduce food rules and rigidity around your eating. So, that labelings of food of good and bad, foods that you're allowed, foods you're not allowed. This can help you to just fit a healthy way of eating into your life, rather than a strict way of controlling everything else around you. And, sometimes people do need help with that. So I know you said things that you can do on your own, and that can be something that maybe is a bit more challenging on your own, depending on where you're at with that. There's loads of great stuff on social media and the internet. If you can't afford a coach, it's just working out who to follow to get right advice. So there's loads of brilliant people putting really good, easy to follow stuff out on, say Instagram, for example. But just look for the people who are not giving, really specific advice like, remove this food group and it'll solve every single problem. People that are a bit more general and seem to be giving a compassionate approach, but definitely look out for advice and free advice that's out there. So yeah, I think, just keep it simple, do what makes you feel good, eat to be satisfied, not just to be full, because there's a difference. Don't forget to keep hydrated, eat a variety of different foods, and just, hopefully those sorts of things are going to help move you in the right direction. That's not too much of a general answer.
No, that was fantastic. I was just thinking that whole time how you said that it was going to be difficult to answer, but you actually answered it in a way that I've never heard anybody answer. And that was just understand that it's not about food. I think that could have been summed up there, because like starting there, I mean, there's so many, so many socioeconomic factors that go into it, whether or not you even have access to food. Like there's so many factors that go into it, but starting out with knowing that there's behaviors behind everything that you do to some degree have control over if you're aware of them, and then you can work to gain control over them. You talked a little bit about, just kind of the mindset around it. How do you go about goal setting with people? Because I think that oftentimes people either just aren't aware that something could be a goal, that it's a possible goal for them, or, they don't know what's realistic for them, and they're setting these really, really unachievable goals. I mean, the extreme side that I would see is just a massive weight loss attempt in a very short period of time that just ends up, recycling back again. So what are some tips that you have for effective goal setting with people?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, we've already discussed sort of how challenges people can face when trying to make a change. So it's making sure you're working with someone, making sure that the goals that you're setting together are the goals that are right for them, that they want to make as a start, and it's not just what you want them to do. Making sure someone is ready for change, so you don't start setting goals with someone who's ambivalent on an issue or at that pre-contemplation stage. That's when you've got to go and employ those nice skills, highlight the ambivalence, evoke the change talk, and just as a sort of, before I get into goal setting, just to make sure that someone is at the right stage before you start goal setting. So just assessing where they are in that cycle of change. But if they are at the point where they definitely want to make a change, but they're not really sure where to start, sometimes that can happen. Like, what is it you want to change? And like, oh, I don't know, you tell me. Again, if they're asking for that advice, you can think about giving them some options, but then, make sure you don't just tell them one thing, options, and then how do you feel about that? Is this something you can do right now? What's most important to you? So it could be maybe writing a list of all the areas that you want to change, and then prioritizing those so that you've got some structure. You haven't just got all these thoughts of like, oh, so much I need to do and I don't know where to start. So I think just write like a brain dump of all the things and then prioritize, and just start with number one. And even number one might get broken down into several stages. It may be useful to complete some values work before goal setting so that you can understand what values are important to the person, who they are, how they want to live their life, making sure their goals align with that. So that might be especially helpful if someone's really committed to a certain way of doing something. So it might be really intensive daily exercise to meet a weight-based goal. And then if you do some values work and they decide they have a value of care that's important to them, you can discuss, just having no rest days and exercising when you feel unwell, align with your value of care. So, in self-care in that sense. And thinking then about how you can still maintain this physical fitness goal, but in a way that doesn't mean you have to suffer, or you can make it more sustainable so it can adapt to fit in with their life, and not be a chore or something that they kind of feel they have to do. It's actually working around something that's important to them. I think everybody has probably heard about SMART goals, and I think they can be helpful to use. So really defining the goal in something that's clear and precise. So rather than just, oh, I'm going to do more exercise, it's I'm going to walk for 20 minutes, 3 times a week for the next 2 weeks. And you can measure then if you've succeeded with that goal. And if you have, then can you expand that goal out further? And if you haven't, what are the reasons? Were you trying to do too much too soon? What barriers got in the way? Was it actually a goal that you wanted to do? Do you still want to continue pursuing this goal? Maybe you tried it and realized, I don't really care that much about doing this walking, in which case maybe move to something else. And I think when discussing change with someone, talking through the importance of the change is useful. So why do you want to make this change? How will things look different if you make this change? What will you be able to do differently? Look at those deeper reasons. So you might ask them why they want to make the change, and they say, oh, I want to lose weight. And then you ask them why. Well, I want to be more active. And then you ask them why. Well, I want to have a family and be able to run around with my kids. And then you get into the real deeper reasoning, and that can help people that, you know, get into the bottom of the glass kind of thing. Really shows the importance of this change. And that's useful on the days where people are finding meeting these goals more challenging and they're struggling, and they can really link back to why they're doing this. When you're goal setting, always important to discuss potential barriers that someone might face. We've talked that there could be loads of barriers. You don't want to be like negative and make people feel like they're not going to be able to do this, but at the same time, if you don't highlight that this could be difficult for these reasons, and you know, when I say that, I mean trying to get them to think of what barriers they may come up against rather than you telling them. They're not, you know, when they do, you know, it's inevitable they probably will come up against some sort of barrier. They don't get a panic or a shock or think, oh, this is too hard and I just give up. They're kind of ready that, oh, I was expecting this to happen and I've got a plan around it. Or, you know, maybe they can be prepared that they've got some degree of flexibility to this goal, so they don't have to stick rigidly to the plan. And this is okay because life happens, and then you can go back to it as and when it's appropriate, kind of thing. So that's important. We've already really talked about fighting reflex, but when goal setting, again, just, you know, we've gone over it really, but just making sure that you're not telling people what to do. You're not saying you should do this. They're saying that this is something they want to do. And I think if you're thinking about something like the self-determination theory, which emphasizes the need for those intrinsic motivations, and those 3 key elements, autonomy, people feeling that they've got choice and that they can self-determine what to do, relatedness, people want to care and feel cared about, and they want to be connected without ulterior motive, and competence, so feel that they are being challenged, but they have the ability and resources to achieve that challenge. And if you keep that in mind when you're goal setting, I do think of those 3 things when I'm goal setting, because then, you know, you can start to think about how you can make sure that they're applied. So, you know, rather than, oh, you should eat more vegetables, you can say, how would you feel about eating more vegetables? Or is there any vegetables you like? Or what would be vegetables you definitely don't want to do? Is this something that's important to you? And you know, offering them, if this is a change that they're choosing to make, and maybe that they say, I didn't care about vegetables, I don't want to eat them, and you have to move on because that's their choice. But also that relatedness, so building the rapport with people, getting to know them, helping them see you genuinely care. You're not just doing a box ticking exercise. You're walking alongside them and meeting them where they're at without judgment. It removes that professional expert dynamic of I'm here to save you that we mentioned before. You're respecting that they're the expert and you're the guide, as I said. So I think, you know, keeping that in mind along with the competence. So this is, you know, when setting goals, consider if they have the skills, the knowledge, the resources to complete that task, that goal. The goal may have absolutely come from them, be completely autonomous, but they might not be able to do it for various reasons. So you might need to signpost them to other people. You might need to help them. If the vegetable thing, it might be giving them some recipes, the seasonality information, or YouTube videos on how to chop onions or something, to give them the competence. But again, just remembering, if you are going to offer that advice, then just making sure you've done that with permission and checking that advice actually is helpful to them. And I think just sort of to wrap that up as well, things like in the competence thing, just having something like a confidence ruler. How confident are you to actually complete this goal, or do you think that you'd be able to do this goal? And then look at the reasons behind the number that they've said. How are you going to measure success? So don't set a goal without people understanding how they know if they've achieved it. So what does success look like? Sometimes people say, oh, I failed this week, I didn't lose any weight. And then you look at what they've actually achieved this week, and they've increased their vegetable intake, reduced their binges, increased their physical activity, whatever. And that goes back to that value-based goal setting and focusing on behaviours to ensure that the success can be understood and celebrated. And just what are we trying to achieve? So when we're setting goals, we can say, oh, we're going to set a health-related goal. What does health even mean? Because it's a broad term. So in the comprehensive coaching model, they use flourishing health, and I find that very helpful, because we're not looking at the pursuit of physical health above everything else. So considering those psychological, social, philosophical needs, does the goal that someone has set meet those needs and help them to feel that they have a purpose in life beyond looking a certain way, for example? I mean, that probably only covers the surface, but I'll probably stop talking at that point.
No, that was beautifully explained. And there are a lot of aspects that I would like to go down someday. And I think that's just as kind of the nature of effective goal setting. There's so many factors and so many variables that come into play. But at the end of the day, if they're not ready for that change, I mean, you have to assess that. Is it right for them? Is it aligned with their values? There's so many factors that are going to make it more or less likely for them to achieve that goal. And I think being an experienced coach, being able to look at all of these variables in this person's life and all of the individual variables is what's going to allow you to then produce, or I guess collaborate to produce actually an effective plan for achieving those goals. Okay, so the final question that I have for you, Kate, how do you feel that the nutrition industry overall can improve? We've touched on so many things today, but what is the first thing that comes to mind?
Oh, such a good question, and a huge question that I surely don't have the answer to. But I mean, there's definitely been huge moves forward with a lot of the issues that we face in the industry, but there is also still a long way to go. And I just think the more that we can be open to listening to each other, even if we don't agree, just acknowledging other people's opinions, being able to be open to the fact that you may have got it wrong and that there are other ways of doing things. So it may not even be that you're wrong, it's just another way is helpful. I think being mindful, when you're posting on social media, for example, make sure you're not alienating people in what you're saying, because we can all feel really passionate about certain things and have opinions, and that's great. But, making sure that you're not kind of closing off other groups of people from being able to be included and have a conversation with you. So being aware of your own biases, because we all have them, but acknowledging that just to help you examine why you have those thoughts, talk to others to help you understand them more. And that can be really important. Probably also people starting to think about learning about things they don't agree with, which is not something that I have done a lot of. You do tend to learn more about the things that you enjoy and that you agree with and that are aligned with you and your values. But actually, probably something I've learned as part of my internship of starting to learn about the other side and you know, you might have assumptions that are wrong, and actually it might not be all as bad as you think. Or if you still don't agree with it at the end of it, at least you've tried to understand it, and you can probably explain your position more eloquently if you've seen both sides of the story. So yeah, trying not to get too, you know, again, algorithms on social media or who you choose to follow, you can get just similar messaging all the time that's going into your mind and maybe without you realizing closing you off from other ways of thinking. So making sure that you're keeping that open mind. So I guess stuff like this, helping people to really understand their role as coaches. So we're moving towards a more holistic approach, we're using evidence-based techniques. We're considering people as a person, so moving away from them shaming and scare tactics, you know, you don't want this enough, or hashtag no excuses, that kind of thing. So we're getting communities of like-minded people together. So the work that you're doing, you know, in the comprehensive coaching community, these are really great communities to create, and conversations that then go on within there that spread. So yeah, I don't think it's a perfect landscape in fitness and nutrition, but just keeping an open and optimistic mind and keeping the conversations going is probably the best thing that we can all individually do.
Your answer could, I think, be then extrapolated to everybody that works with anybody, like being willing to accept that maybe you aren't correct and maybe you don't have all the answers. That's just such a valuable first step. And I like to kind of think of it as having a little bit of a scientific mindset, having this idea that I am going to examine all of the available evidence to the best degree that I can, limit bias as much as I possibly can, and really just be open to new possibilities and new information that's going to prove me wrong, honestly. So, well, that was awesome, Kate. You gave us some amazing tips, amazing insight into working with people, and just really how deep this goes. And again, it's not about the macro split. It's not about some little you know, taking carbs out of the diet or whatever it is. There's so much more that goes into it. And I'm glad that we touched we didn't even talk about nutrition necessarily at all. Like, we didn't talk about fats, carbs. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It's like a lot of that stuff is figured out. We know how to build muscle. We know how to lose weight. We know how to do these things. It's about applying that information to the individual. So thanks very much for giving us some insight on that, and hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.